Okay. And let me share my screen. And can you see my Policy Leadership Academy presentation? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So welcome. Okay, thank you. Welcome. This is the Policy Leadership Academy brought to you by Best Start Children's Bureau, Antelope Valley Partners for Health. This is, yay, we made it, Module 7. So we're at past the halfway point. So this is Module 7. And a little bit about us. I know I bring this up but it's to just remind you what we're doing here. The Policy Leadership Academy brings together stakeholders, community residents to understand and address local, statewide, and federal issues through shared knowledge of causes and impact, current problem-solving frameworks and best practices, and actions to address change with an emphasis on policy. Our timeline, so we're right there in the middle now. We went through August together. Now we're in the middle of September, and we're going to go into the middle of October. So that's our timeline. And our agenda today, we have our speaker, Apolonio Polo Morales. He's with CHIRLA. We're going to have a Q&A, and then we will have a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're done for the day, for the Tuesday. And so Apolonio Polo Morales is with the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, also known as CHIRLA. The topic today will be on social justice. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can introduce our guest speaker. Apolonio Morales joined CHIRLA in 2014 as political director and transitioned to external affairs director in 2019. Previously, he was a labor organizer for the California Nurses Association, United States Workers, Healthcare Workers Alliance, and a community organizer for Contra Costa Interfaith Supporting Community Organization and Berkeley Organizing Congregations for Action, where he served as interim director. He was National Immigration Organizer for Faith in Action's Campaign for Citizenship. A child of undocumented immigrants, Polo has dedicated his life to advancing pro-immigrant policies and changing the anti-immigrant narrative in the United States. He graduated from the University of California at Berkeley with a BA in English in 1999. It's my pleasure to introduce Polo Morales.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and good morning to everybody. And of course, my dogs are going to be barking in the background right when I get handed over the mic. Today we're going to be talking about social justice, and I'm going to be more focused in terms of what community organizing and how values and narratives fit into that. So I'm going to tell you, we're going to go through an exercise, then we're going to go through a case study, and then we're going to talk about a little bit of how we ground ourselves with some of our values and the stories that we have to be able to do the work that we do. And then if we have time, I'll give a little immigration update. There's a few things that are happening at the county and at the national level that we should be paying attention to. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if you could, hold on a second. There we go. All right. Okay, can folks see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. Sorry, getting confused with the Zoom stuff. All right. So organizing with our values and narratives. I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off here because we have limited time. But just the overview for today is we're going to be discussing the world as it is, the world as it should be, get into the story of self, and provide an immigration update. So I've explained that a little bit. And then if there's time for reflections and evaluation on just what you heard today. And so the world as it is and the world as it should be. The objectives to this module here, this presentation, is to create a shared vision and purpose to position, and this is for your departments or any organization or committee or individual, to be able to transform their community. And so from what is real and to what they want it to be, the ideal. And so in terms of community organizing and fighting for social justice, it really is about bringing people together with the shared values and ideas to be able to move where we're at to where we should be, knowing that the world that we live in right now needs a lot of changes. But we can't change the world overnight, right? So we strive to do what we can to win locally, expand on those wins, and then be able to grow, to change policies that are going to change people's lives for the long term. And so I'm going to go ahead and put us into a Jamboard exercise. So I'm going to stop sharing for a bit, if I could figure out. Here we go. All right. And in the chat, you're going to get a link. So go ahead and click that link, and you should all be able to have access to it. And we're going to go through an exercise, and I'm going to go ahead and share this right now. So I see there's an anonymous rhino. Somebody's already joined. If folks can go ahead and click on that Jamboard, we can get started on this exercise. So I should be seeing a whole bunch of folks clicking the link and joining. All right, are we there? Were folks able to click the link?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to figure out. Okay, it's hard for me to tell whether folks are on or not. Let me refresh.
I'm on.
Okay, can you write with the sticky note? Where it says here, I've just put hello. Are folks able to do that? Okay, good. All right, so hold on one second. Okay.
I'm not sure how to use a sticky note.
All right, there's a lot of hellos here. That's great. Okay, so we're gonna stop putting hello for a second. We're gonna talk about universal values. And so as we talk about these universal values, I wanna go ahead and just open up the idea of what a universal value is. What are the things that we can all agree upon? That's what we mean with universal values. So I'm gonna go ahead, and on the left-hand side, there's a little sticky note that says sticky note that'll pop up when you click on it, and then you can write like something like love, right? For instance, love is very universal, something that we can all agree on, right? Very few people can disagree with love. But see, we have a lot of values that we can reflect here. So I see a lot of respect, right? Happiness as a value, safety. Any other issues that folks see?
I'm sorry, I don't see how I get a sticky note.
There should be a bar on the left-hand side.
A bar, yes, I see
Yeah.
it.
There's a pen, there's an eraser, there's a select arrow, and then there's a sticky note. The fourth
Okay,
item. You click on sticky note, and then you can write whatever you want. You can change the color.
yeah,
And
nothing's
so-
happening for me.
All right. Then if you're having issues, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So with this exercise, we have kindness, we have financial security, we value that, we respect, life, peace, happiness, we have helping one another, honesty, loyalty, empathy, safety, more respect, lots of respect. Any other values that unity, right? Transparency, stability, fairness. All right, any other
Compassion,
compassion? Go ahead, you can just say it out loud right here.
yeah.
Compassion. Any other values that we can all agree? Equity, okay.
Help.
Health is a value, right? We value people's health. We take care of one another. We make sure that when someone is sick, we care for them. Inclusion. I see somebody found the pen. That's you're getting closer. The fourth one is the sticky note.
Yeah, I'm not getting a sticky note at all.
All right, we don't really have time to troubleshoot that, but just go ahead and say any others out loud. Okay, sustainability, protection, compassion. So we do this exercise of universal values to get on the same page, right? There are values that we can all agree upon. It doesn't matter what religion we were raised with or lack of a religion. Doesn't matter what community we live in, what part of the world we live in. There are a certain set of values that help us get along with one another, right? That the fabric of our society is really tied together because we have, at least to a certain extent, the majority of the folks that we are around have these values as ways of practicing or living their life, right? And if we engage in these values, the world can sustain itself, right? It's not a perfect world, but it's, at least in principle, we can agree on certain things. And so when we talk about these values and we talk about community organizing, okay, here we go. When we talk about community organizing, and I'm trying to erase these, and they're not going to erase. Okay. We talk about the world as it is and the world as it should be. So when we talk about social justice, we talk about the issues that we encounter in the world that we live in. And so, and I tell people when I was an organizer, I would walk, to the local church or the local coffee shop and meet with people. And I would always ask them the question: if we had a magic wand, what is the first thing you would change about your neighborhood? And so, as you can imagine, I got a lot of different answers. And I think that's important to have those different answers because everybody has a different perspective. What can change overnight? What would be ideal, right? Based on our current experience and what's happening right now in our lives. So I would always tell folks too, when we go through this exercise, just imagine you're walking down the street in your neighborhood or in downtown LA. What are some of the things that you see, right? Okay. You see less crime? Okay. That's good. All right. So we're not there yet, but what do you see right now? Right. Well, so what's the opposite of less crime? All right, it's crime, right? So there is, we're actually at a lower point in terms of crime in our nation's history, but we still see some folks that are in desperate mode, right? So they're trying to survive, or they're trying to, or there are many issues that are impacting their lives. So we do see an element of that. We see lack of affordable housing, right? If you can't afford housing, it's the likelihood is either you got to go somewhere else or you end up on the streets, and folks are living out of their cars. There's terrible public transportation infrastructure. Yes, definitely. When I was a kid, there wasn't a metro that took you all the way to Hollywood. So we would have to take the bus, from El Monte, where I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley. Racism, food insecurity, substance abuse, right? The lack of rent control. It's now more expensive here than in Manhattan. That's crazy to me. What else do we see? Any other issues that you may encounter? Things that the world is hurting, and it's at this point in time right now. Anything else?
Ignoring each other.
All right, ignoring each other. So there's a certain and that could go digitally as well, right? We sure like to talk on social media, but we don't really spend much time talking face to face one another, bouncing off ideas, agreeing and disagreeing, agreeing to disagree, right? Having different perspectives, being very much mindful that we all have a different perspective in life and an opinion, right? Okay, so there's environmental concerns, right? Droughts. We just had a little bit of rain, but we were, basically in a drought season. We see what's happening when there's lack of water in the state of California. There's a lot of issues that are here in the here and now. So healthcare. Okay, so now the world as it should be, right? So we've already started to see some folks understand this exercise very well. Yes, domestic violence numbers rising. And if we applied the values that we just talked about in the previous slide, what would the world, what should it look like, right? If we actually applied the values that we just talked about, love, respect, kindness, compassion, what world would we be able to see? And I see healthcare for everyone, right? Great public transportation infrastructure. We would see less crime. We would see peace, right? What else would we see?
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing, right? If you work in a city and you contribute, wouldn't it be nice to live in the same city so we wouldn't have to drive so many hours to get to work? What else would we see?
Cost of living.
Cost of living, okay. We have no one on the streets, less homelessness. The cost of living would be something that would, not break the bank, right? So we would be able to eat, live, sleep, in safe neighborhoods without the fear of being evicted or something terrible happening to us. So as you can see, this world as it is and the world as it should be when we apply our values is one thing, but how do we get there, right? How do we get from one area to the other? And so, and this is the bridge, right? How do we get to here? Well, that bridge, I won't write it because it always comes out weird, or maybe I'll try it, is organizing, right? An individual, unless, there's some kind of a billionaire, right? Who has a heart of gold, and we're still trying to see how that plays out. But organizing is the way to get to the world as it should be. And so that's important because as individuals, we can only do so much. We can help our neighbor, we can help a family member. But when we talk about the systems that we have in place that are not working, the only way to change that is by applying our values, organizing ourselves, and then being able to impact and move the world just a little bit more towards the side of the way it should be, as opposed to the way it is. And so I'm going to stop sharing this right now and go back to the PowerPoint. But I like doing this exercise because it helps us ground ourselves in terms of like what it is that we agree upon and what are some of the ideas in terms of, what can be. And so as organizers and folks that fight for social justice, we need to create the imagination for things to be able to happen. If you're not inspiring others, you're not doing your job. And so we can't do this alone. So we need to believe that we can actually change things. And that takes that little bit of a forward forward stance to be able to make that a reality. So I'm going to share a case study from one of my organizing, some of the folks that I met when I was with the PICO Network or Faith in Action, folks that are organizing Rwanda. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about Rwanda. When I was with PICO, we did faith-based community organizing. We met a Lutheran pastor who wanted to explore this idea of community organizing in Rwanda. And if you have any inkling of what took place in Rwanda, there was a terrible genocide against folks that have been living together for many, many years for political reasons, and you can imagine any other reasons. Folks were pitted against each other, and this terrible, terrible genocide took place. Folks were killed, maimed. Terrible, terrible things have happened. And so when we look at Rwanda, it's an example of what happens when we forget, right? And we believe other people that the other people are the problem, that something should be done about those other people, right? And we forget that we're actually connected with one another, right? Regardless of where we live in the world and how we grew up and our belief systems, we can actually hold society together if we stick to our values. Well, when you throw those values out the window, terrible things can start to happen. And we saw that in Rwanda. So this case study comes from a place that has gone through a lot of hardship, right? So we heard this from a Lutheran pastor who was in Rwanda, who wanted to take the model of organizing, community organizing, fighting for social justice, and implement it in his region here in Rwanda. So the issues, right? How do you go about identifying what folks want to do? There's so many issues and so many problems in society. Where do you start, right? And so through the process of, and this is in Karehe, Southeast Rwanda, folks got together and they engaged 2,000 residents and discussed and prioritized some issues in their community. So they were able to identify healthcare as the #1 priority. And why healthcare? Healthcare because the nearest pharmacy was 20 miles away. So if you got sick, unless you had a ride, it would be very, very difficult for you to walk 20 miles and then come back 20 miles, right? So if you were sick and trying to make that trek would be very, very difficult. And so people died and suffered for want of basic medicine. And so that was the issue out of thousands of conversations that they had, that folks wanted to focus on that as #1. So the solution, right? So the people set out to demand their local mayor and the Ministry of Health to build a pharmacy. And they said, if we had access to drugs here, to have, basic things like Tylenol and like, anything that can help, prevent infections or any of that kind of stuff, like, any injections that we may need, those types of medicine. If we had a closer place, we would be able to save people's lives, and we wouldn't have folks, desperately trying to find ways to walk 20 miles to go see the pharmacist. And so they came to their local elected officials and they said, this is what we want to work on. The response was, well, it's going to be too expensive, right? And so they told them that they needed, they have to clear a space for it and create land for it, to be able to, build a foundation for that. There's no foundation. It's going to cost too much money. It's impossible. So it's a nice idea, but we don't think it's going to happen, right? And I think we've all heard that before, right? So they organize themselves, right? So women from 6 neighboring villages helped to clear the land. And so as you can see, the grass there on one side and the dirt on the other, you got to get rid of the grass if you're going to be building anything on there. So they said, okay, so if they're asking us to clear the land, then we're going to go ahead and clear the land. And they dug up an area for the foundation. So they literally mapped out, right, physically, how they were going, where they imagined this pharmacy was going to be located. And so they dug up space for the foundation. And then they gathered as many people from the neighboring villages. They organized themselves and walked 600 tons worth of stones for miles to the site. They broke the stones and then they built the foundation. So if you can imagine getting all your friends and family members together to be able to move 600 tons worth of stones, just imagine how long that would take and just the magnitude of that, right? And so lo and behold, once they were able to get all the materials and everything down to build the foundation, the local government, took the necessary steps to finish this pharmacy project. Why? Because it became very clear that the community really wanted this, and they were willing to go and meet halfway to be able to get it done. And so this pharmacy was created. And so they erected the 4 walls. They stocked up on all the medicine, basic, essential stuff to prevent infections and whatnot. Folks were able to literally walk down the street and be able to go to their local pharmacy. And so then what the community did was, okay, we have a success. Now we got to focus on other issues, right? And so I want to go ahead and stop sharing here for a second and get into actually the story itself. But based on what you heard, right? So you have folks that are in a region that had seen civil war, working together with their neighboring villages and everybody together to be able to create social change, right? To create that larger vision and manifest it and make it a reality. And so the way I was taught this story and all this, you can look it up online. It's all fun stuff. But this was not the only pharmacy that was built out. There was actually many, many pharmacies that were built out in this region to help build an infrastructure for healthcare. If you can't access healthcare, and if it's very difficult for you to do that, there's going to be people that are going to be suffering for it. So this is an example of a successful campaign to be able to build something that didn't exist before, that to fundamentally change people's lives. And so when we talk about community organizing, this is the process of that. When we get to how do we use our values and put them into a public setting, right? Because it's not enough to say, oh, we organized all these folks and made it happen. There's actually a lot of communication and a lot of stories that are told in between this process. So you have to convince people that the impossible can be made possible. And so how do you go about doing that? Well, we go through a process called the story of self. And so you can create social change through story, right? By talking a little bit about yourself and an experience that you had, you can actually convince others and compel others to take action. And so how does that happen, right? We're connecting community organizing, values, and now we're going to talk about story of self or narrative. So I'm gonna walk you through how that works. So if we had time, you would all learn how to do this. We'd break out in sessions and all that stuff, but we have a limited amount of time. So I'll give you an example what a story of self is when we get towards the end of this session here. And then also to learn how to coach others in the story of self. So at least you'll get a basic understanding of how this functions. Okay, so when we talk about compelling others into action, we have the how, which is the strategy and analysis. This is all the numbers and the data. If you've ever read any charts that are data driven, unless you're really, really into research, you love that stuff. But if you're not, your eyes start to glaze over and you start, falling asleep. The why is the story motivation. The story motivation, what compels us, right, is when you combine data and research and numbers with a story. And so that's the magic that creates the lightning here that moves people and compels them into action. So when people tell you their story and it's of hardship, you feel compelled to do something about it. And so those are the two elements that are necessary, which is the head and the heart in order to create action. And so when we listen to a story, we start, it starts creating emotions for us, right? That really start to underscore our values, right? Your brain starts saying, hey, wait a minute, but we believe that people should treat each other with respect. So it's it's unfair that you were treated that way. Or it's unfair that you lost your housing. I believe that everyone should have a roof over their head, right? People work very hard and do what they can to get by, and then they're evicted. That is unfair, right? So our values start getting stirred as we listen to any story, and we try to put ourselves in other people's shoes and understand where they're coming from, to be able to say, something is either right or something is completely off. And so that also compels us into taking action. So when we talk about the story of self on the top left here, this is part of an ecosystem of different stories and different narratives. So if we start with the story of self and we go out into the community and we talk with one another, we realize that actually there's a story of us, right? People living in Los Angeles, for instance, right? We have certain things that we like, we can make generalizations about that, but really it is about connecting with other people in their story, in their struggle, to be able to say, you know what, I also went through that. And having gone through that, maybe we should do something about it. So the story of us then becomes the story of now. The story of now is the urgency, right? The urgency of making it happen now, right? We can't wait, for the next pandemic to have an infrastructure that's going to help people. We need to start doing that now, right? We've gone through the common struggle of COVID-19. Now we should really think about what structures and channels of information and access to healthcare, all of that should be taken into consideration right now. So the urgency would be right now, for instance. And then the purpose is really what holds everything together, is we all have to examine what it means for us, right? How do we fit into the story? How do we fit into this ecosystem? Are we impacted? Are we sympathetic, empathetic? All of these ideas come about. And so before we share publicly, however, we always have to remember that people are like icebergs. Not that they're cold and or anything like that, but icebergs in the sense that you can see the tip of the iceberg, right? But what you don't see is what's underneath the water. And so for a lot of people, we only see about the 10% of people, hello, good morning, how was your weekend, that kind of stuff, right? For others, we go a little bit deeper in our relationships with them, and they tell us how their kids are doing, and anything that's happening, what's new in their life that's a good thing, or any struggles or challenges. They go a little bit deeper. And then at the bottom, there's another, that's like 80%, right? So there's like the 10% at the bottom, I would say, are the things you don't tell anyone that are private, that you keep to yourself. So when we tell public stories to compel others to take action, we have to be mindful of what we want to share and how comfortable we are with that. And so if we were doing this as a practice here in this session, we would walk through what that means in much greater detail and break out into groups and whatnot. But I'll give you an example of what that looks like in just a little bit here. All right. So the basic structure of telling your story is you come across a certain moment in time in your life where you had to make some kind of a choice, right? And every story is like this, whether you're Shrek and, all the animals and all the magical, kingdom folks show up at your doorstep and they're saying, hey, we're getting kicked out of the forest, and the king is being really mean, and reluctantly Shrek takes up on this adventure to be able to push back on that so he can get peace of mind in his own house, right? So some folks are reluctant in that choice. Some folks are compelled to just, I need to do something about it, this is an impossible situation. Some folks have no choice but to make a choice sometimes, but each one of these has its challenge presents itself. There is a choice and there's an outcome to that. The moral is what we learn through this experience. And so when we talk about the choices that we make in life, there are moments in time where we could have gone one way or the other, right? And we chose to go this way. And because of that, my life ended up going in this direction. You can learn from a good choice and from a bad choice, right? Maybe buying a timeshare in New Orleans wasn't the best idea. Or, I'm going to go back to school because I need to care for my family. You know, there's different choices in life, but they all have some kind of moral or tale to tell at the end of the day. And these stories are really what we share with others publicly, that help them understand where we were and what we did in order to change things. And so I'm going to give you an example of a story of self, about me. I'm going to stop sharing here, just given we don't have a lot of time. But so who is Polo Morales, right? Does anybody know who I am? Has anybody seen me on TV, maybe in an interview or something? Probably not. Who knows? I'm not that famous, but I have a story to tell. And so this is my story. My name is Polo Morales. I grew up in El Monte in the San Gabriel Valley. And, when I was a kid, having finally understood where my mom, why she couldn't go certain places and do certain things, that was a little bit of a revelation. And so how did I come about understanding that my mom was an undocumented immigrant, right? And so you start picking up on some of the clues when you're a kid. So my mom actually came to the US in the early 70s, in 1973. And what she was looking for was to follow in my grandfather's footsteps, who was a bracero. And so as a bracero, he was working up and down the coast of California, working different field jobs. And so with the bracero program, if you were Mexican, you came to the US, you were able to work here, to live here in a camp, and then make a little bit of money and then go back home. And this would be seasonal work, so you could travel back and forth. By the early 70s, that program was no longer there. So the bracero program no longer existed. And so when my mom, she was growing up, she was the youngest, and she was like, I love, living in this little village in Jalisco, but I think there's more to life. And so she said, I want to become a nurse. And so her lifelong dream was to become a nurse. And so what she did was, I'm going to go to the US, I'm going to work for a year, save my money, and then come back and go to the University of Guadalajara. And I'm going to become a nurse. And so she came in the early 70s, and what she quickly realized is that it's not that easy to make it here in the US. The streets are not paved of gold. And so at least our streets were not. So what she did was she worked with the hotel industry. She would clean rooms, and then she became a seamstress. And so, after a while, you got to eat, you got to pay rent, you got to, everything else to survive. And so, eventually down the line, she meets my dad. And so my sister comes along afterwards, and then my dad is no longer part of the picture. So she became a single mom. And so when she became a single mom, to care for us, we would be left with like family members and whatnot, and all that, it's something that we all do. So, what she would go to work, but sometimes we would end up in the factory, especially on the weekends. And so she would work the sewing factory, and all my childhood, all I can remember is those Saturdays and sometimes Sundays, late into the day, having my mom, behind a machine, and my sister and I playing on the factory floor. I would push her in these little carts that had material in it. We would make little doll dresses for her, Barbie, or what we thought was a Barbie. I can't guarantee it was official. We kind of got by and just learned to live at the factory on the weekends. And so my mom, she would open up the factory and close the factories at the end of the day. We would head out. But all my childhood just have memories about that. And so what I saw of my mom was like, she was very, very strong there. She was a leader, and she didn't let the boss tell her, what to do. Even, she knew what to do. You don't need to tell me. So she had to take this really hard stance. So my mom's been very strong and opinionated for many, many years. And I saw her, at times when the boss would come and yell at her and stuff, and she'd be like, I'm not a dog, don't yell at me, And so she would be that person. And so I saw my mom as a very strong person. And then as time would have it, my mom would, tell us, what, you should really think about going to college and, or, finishing high school and all that other stuff, look for a nice job and all that. So I got into the Upward Bound program. And so in Upward Bound, I was able to get, college, like type courses and a summer program, and I got to go to La Jolla. So I learned all about college, and, thanks to that program, I was able to apply and go to UC Berkeley. And so my first year in Berkeley, getting used to new things and all that other stuff. After my first year, I get a call from my sister, and she says, you got to come home. And I said, well, what's going on? And she said, well, mom is sick. And I'm like, what do you mean mom's sick? And she says, well, mom just had a stroke. And so she is half paralyzed. And so she's at LA County UC Medical Center, which I guess we still call it General Hospital back then. And she said, you got to come home. And so I got on the first bus from Oakland. I took it. I ended up somewhere near Skid Row, and somehow I walked my way up to LA County UC Medical Center. And so when I walked into the emergency room, I saw my mom on the bed. She didn't have any health insurance, and there she was, half paralyzed. And for me, that moment really impacted me, and it really made me like think about like what is important in life, right? So here's my mom, and she's suffering, and she's not the strong woman that I remember. And so I went up to her, and I said, "Mom, I'm gonna quit school, and I'm gonna come take care of you." And she said, she could barely speak, and then she said, "You're crazy." She said, "You're gonna take the opportunity that I never had." And when she said that, a lot of things came to mind. And a few things. If you remember the early 90s, it was a very political time, very anti-immigrant. And so I do remember the commercials on TV with Pete Wilson, just how immigrants were destroying the fabric of California and all that. And then on the other end, I saw my mom working herself into a stroke. And so for me, that seemed unfair. And being the good son that I was, or tried to be, I told her, okay, I'm going to go back to school. And so thankfully, my sister was able to take care of my mom. She got better. A lot of financial aid came back home. I wasn't able to go to the movies or concerts like my college peers were doing. That was helping to pay rent and buy food at home. And so over time, I started getting involved in community organizing on campus, and then eventually, started working for union and started working on issues of immigration. Over many years, my mom got better. What also helped her was the '86 amnesty. So she was able to adjust her status and become a citizen. But for many, many, many years, she was undocumented, and she remained so in fear of deportation. So for me, having seen my mom go through that experience really compelled me to take action, right? I felt like something needed to be done, that I wasn't the only one experiencing this, right? Other people's parents were working themselves to the bone, trying to survive, trying to make a better life for us. And for me, it really came down to like, what am I going to do about that? And so I decided to work for organizations like CHIRLA to be able to move immigration policy that can say, you know what, you've worked a lot, there's a lot of folks that worked all their life here in the US that are like on the point of retiring and, are retired or have gotten sick and passed away, that don't have that luxury of becoming citizens. And so for me, it's always been an issue that's close to my heart. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop talking here. But if we go back to the idea of like the choice, right, that needed to be made, I had a choice of whether I was going to go back to school, or stay with my mom. And so I stayed. I ended up going back to school, and so that created a whole different course in my life. That choice opened up opportunities to work with nonprofit organizations and unions and whatnot. And it also allowed me to work in a space that actually has moved policies to be able to help the lives of immigrants. And so the moral of this is, there's moments in time. What I've learned from this is that I love my mom very much, number one. Number two, I'm forever grateful to my sister for taking care of her. Number three, this being compelled to do something has allowed me to work in a space where I can involve others to do the same, to share their stories, to be able to move policies forward. And so in terms of the story of self, this is what we mean by it is, what are the hardships that we face? What are the commonalities, right? And just raise your hand or put it on the chat if folks felt connected to the story that I just told in any way, shape, or form. All right. Did you see a sense of injustice in the story? Okay. All right. Did you see the kind of learning process of it? What did I learn in the process, right? Did you get a sense of like me changing as an individual, right? Right. So all of this helps us to paint a clearer picture. So it's not just a talking point on TV, right? Because there's a lot of people just putting stuff about immigrants and it's either true or not true. Nobody knows. So it's a lot of misinformation out there. But the stories are the things that give us a little bit more insight in terms of what folks are actually going through. And so through that storytelling, this is an example of why the Dreamers and the AB 540 students were so successful in California, were because they were telling their stories, right? Who are the most sympathetic immigrants in the nation right now? It's Dreamers, folks that were undocumented youth. And now those Dreamers are in their 30s and entering into their 40s now. And so we haven't had immigration reform to be able to address these issues. So right now, I'm gonna give you a quick update before we start opening up for question and answer. Right now, there is an effort at the state level, at the federal level, for something called changing the registry date. This would not overhaul the entire system. Changing the registry date is something that was implemented in 1929 and was last updated in 1986. So back in 1986, if your mom or dad came before 1972, January 1st, 1972, they were able to adjust their status without any legal changes or anything to the law. And so basically what it was saying is, you've been here long enough, we recognize your contributions, go ahead and apply for lawful permanent residency, and eventually you can become a citizen. And so that date has not changed since 1986. And so now even our great grandmothers and grandmothers are not qualifying for this. And so there has to be a change. And so what we're asking Congress right now is to change the registry date, to update it to, something closer to maybe 2015. And what that would do is open up citizenship for about 80% of the undocumented population in the US. And so if you think of all the families that are suffering and having a hard time, and what citizenship could actually do for them to have peace of mind, that is something very significant. And in LA County right now, just at the local level, we're also working on what's called the Immigrants RLA campaign. And so there's a vote today on the American Rescue Plan Fund. So this is federal funding that came to LA County, which was around, I think, 975 million the first time, and another 975 million the second time. But because of our collective advocacy, right, we built the foundation, we met our elected officials halfway, we told the stories. If this vote goes through today, then we're going to see direct help to the immigrant community with housing programs, right? With access to food, closing the digital divide. And so all these issues we took on as a coalition of organizations, over 100 folks coming together. If this vote goes through today, we are going to have an estimated $30 million of investment in the immigrant community. The question then is why, right? Why? Because 1/3 of our county is immigrant. And so when you talk about relief and recovery efforts, that's a whole lot of folks working in restaurants and working different jobs that have been paying into the system, right? That don't benefit directly from the system. We still need to help immigrants, whether they're DACA, TPS, temporary protected status, whether they're undocumented or lawful permanent resident. We have mixed status families. And so when we talk about relief and recovery, we can't pretend that immigrants are not part of the equation. And so if all goes well, knock on wood, if this vote happens, we're going to get a heck of a lot more help with the programs that are out there to be able to allow for immigrants to be able to be supported in this relief and recovery effort. And so again, none of this is possible without underscoring the values, right, that we believe in and lifting those up, telling the stories of directly impacted people, and then doing the advocacy work to create that social change, right? We wouldn't see this level of investment in our immigrant communities if we had all stayed at home. And so this is where, even during a COVID pandemic, hopefully we're coming at the tail end of all of this and, that stuff, you can make change. And so we've been at this for over 2 years now to get to this point. And it's really exciting and I can't wait till maybe 1 o'clock when I get the news regarding what happened. But that's how community organizing works. And I hope I was able to tell a compelling story. My mom did get better. She still has health issues. I always forget to tell people that. She is a citizen. She is a registered voter, and she votes every election. And every election, I get a call. Hey, mijo, who's this person? What is this ballot initiative about? And then I have to do all the research to help her out. So again, active participants in our democracy. So I want to go ahead and just stop here and just open it up for any question and answer. And just, any thoughts? Thank you.
We have Sean that has raised his hand.
Sean?
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Morales, for telling that story. It was so touching and inspiring. And I guess my question is less about, well, I guess it is about social justice. So my son is, his mother is first generation American. His grandmother, her mother, was brought by his great grandmother here with under similar circumstances. And I guess my question would be is, how can those of us who have children who are descended from immigrants, how do we be better allies? How do we tell those stories and keep that responsibility alive for our children and for the next generation, so that they, so that they know what is happening, what has happened, and that they are aware of their heritage in that respect.
Yeah, definitely. And, we talk about the US as a nation of immigrants, and, some folks have been here, generations, right? From, whether you're Native American or, you're brought here in slave ship, or, you came here through Mayflower, all of that. So when we think about what it means, right, to remember, right? We have immigrants in the US at all points of our history. We've had them all at all points, including just recently. So Ukraine, right? Folks are coming from Ukraine, folks are coming from Afghanistan, folks are coming to our southern border. And so these are issues that continue. They continue because other places are not applying the values, right, that we discuss, or they erode those values, and then you get crisis. Sometimes it's climate change, sometimes it's different issues, violence, you name it. And so folks are seeking a better life. And so in that remembering, when I meet folks who are like, how do we get folks to understand the issue, is to talk to somebody that is directly impacted, and not as a curiosity, but a little bit deeper than that, right? It's not just surface level. It's like going deeper in the iceberg. What's your story? And let them talk. And I can guarantee you there's a story baked in there that is a compelling one. People don't just pick up and leave their homes, right? If I can imagine myself right now, like, what would compel me to pick up and just leave and go somewhere to a completely different country? Those circumstances would have to be very dire for me to do that. If you look, I always tell people the Costa Rica example. I don't meet a lot of Costa Ricans in the US. There's some, but I don't meet a whole lot of them. And the question is, why not, right? And so maybe there's some systems in Costa Rica that are actually working for people. That could be a thing. And so if we look at ourselves, right, migration is not just, national borders. There's migration from different states. There was a huge Black migration into California during World War II, from the South and into northern states. Like, there's a lot of migration happening internally. And it's really getting to know the people that are directly impacted and asking them, like, what's your story? That's where it begins. And if we stop asking, then we're never going to get deeper into those relationships with the folks that live in our community. And it's that much easier to demonize them or blame them for all of our social ills. And so for me, it really is about continuing to build relationships through conversations and through storytelling.
Thank you, Sean. Polo, we have another a question in the chat. It's from Karen. Her question is, how do we deal with competing values where not everyone agrees with the value prioritization and the desired outcome from that value? And how do you instill additional values that might be necessary in order for the bridge to be built for the desired outcome? Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, I can tell you, it's really hard to judge somebody that at a deeper level. And so it's through the practice of engaging with them, right? So like what's happened in our country right now is the polarization that we see. And social media has not helped, right? When I was a kid, like Republicans, Democrats, you can sit in the same room, have a conversation, talk about life and family, and maybe disagree a little bit on politics, but it wasn't the thing that was going to break off the relationship with the person, right? Your politics were not the thing that was going to break it off. It was based on the values, right? Did you treat me with respect? Do you espouse love? Do you care for your family? Do you care about education? Do you care for others? Like that kind of thing. That's how you measured whether someone was worth hanging out with or not. Now it's the litmus test has really become politics. And that is unfortunate. But at the same time, it's not the only time we've seen this in history. We've actually seen, the pendulum swing the opposite way. In moments of crisis, people do come together. And so I think that's shifting now. I think folks are realizing as we're coming out of this pandemic, like, when was the last time people went dancing, right? And, how fun was that? Remember dancing? Remember going to the beach together? Remember going to big family, reunions and restaurants and all that? Like, or hanging out with your friends and in a totally different country, like those types of experiences, right, are what is going to put the glue back into our nation in terms of our values and the relationships that we have with one another. I think, but we have to address the things that are wrong, right? And sometimes those things are, they're complicated, they're complex, but standing by and doing nothing is not a solution.
Thank you, Polo. Again, if anyone has a question, comment for Polo, you can raise your hand, put your comment, question in the chat. I'll give it another couple seconds to see if we have anybody.
Yeah, I see the roller rinks.
I don't know why I keep following. I follow a couple of people on Instagram. I think we need to bring that back. It's so much. I
Yeah,
remember doing it.
definitely.
Fun
Roller
and
skating is back.
yeah, old school roller skating rink. We also have a comment from Flora. She says, Polo, I appreciate you sharing your story of self with us. Thank you. It's nice to hear stories that one resonates with and know that there is something that we can do. So thank you.
Thank you.
We also had Tiara said, thank you for sharing your story, inspiring.
Yes, and what I want to say to that is everybody has an inspiring story, and you'd be surprised. Like the thing you don't think is really that important actually is really important to someone else going through it, and so it really forces us to put ourselves in different situations. So, by nature, whether it was hanging out by the fire, around in a circle telling stories or ghost stories, that kind of thing. Like we all kind of pick up on there's a little bit of an entertainment factor to it, but it's more than that, right? When we talk about relationship with human to human conversations, getting to know that person in a deeper sense forces you to question a lot of the things that you may be reading somewhere else, and forces you to say, is that really true? Right? Am I supposed to demonize this person? Because this person, like, I'll give you an example. My father-in-law, very, very, our politics differ greatly, but we're still able to sit down for Thanksgiving dinner. And I think it's because he sees what I bring to my family, to my wife, and I also see what he does for my wife's mom. And so she has Alzheimer's disease and taking care of her. So even though our politics are, not on the same spectrum in that regard, well, I mean, they are on the spectrum, but not completely, the thing that's going to end the relationship, right? We look at what we do, not at what we're repeating from talking points on TV, so like, I think that is a measure of how we can value one another and not focus so much on the things that, we disagree on or separate us. That, sometimes that's not the important stuff, right? The important stuff is caring for one another.
Polo, we also have Elvia said in the chat, thank you, Mr. Morales, for sharing your story. Like you, I had a grandparent that was a bracero and grew up with immigrant parents. And I think she says, thank you for your advocacy and leadership.
Oh, thank you all. Yes, definitely. It's not a unique story. As the more I tell it, the more I encounter people. Oh yeah, my grandfather, he came to the U.S. and bracero, and sometimes they got paid. That was nice. Sometimes they didn't. Yeah, that's the experience.
Denise also had in the chat, it is so important to share your story and how you worked through it. You never know who needs to hear it and the impact it can have on their life. Also, there is no limit to what we can achieve together. That's
exactly it. And I encourage you to sit down and have a cup of coffee. I mean, it's a lost art. Some of us do it better than others. Some of us are doing it through our phones, but you can only communicate so much without being in other people's space, right? So you get context when you're in other people's space, or you go to a coffee shop, right? There's more to it than just like FaceTiming or sending messages of approval through thumbs ups or hearts. It's more it feels more human, I would say, and hopefully we can embark on more of that in the coming year.
Polo, we also had Karen in the chat said finding common ground is huge. I think that's an incredible takeaway.
Yeah, definitely. If again, we can't, you know, when we saw homelessness here where I live in the city of Whittier, people were saying, you know, whether you were like right or left or, you know, Republican or Democrat or anywhere in between or beyond that, people were like, something needs to be done, right? So we all recognize that you can't avoid it. And so we can just wait around for things to happen or somebody can do something about it. So I think we're coming to certain reckonings, and that is going to require us to be more human with one another.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to give it another couple seconds to see if anybody has any final chats or wanted to raise their hand to make a final comment. And Fran's taking yourself off mute.
Yeah, just kind of, this is my opinion, of course. I think that we have to remember we are all united as human beings. There's no separation of color, creed, or whatever you are. And that's what we have to remember. We're all here like this subject is right now. We're all immigrants, no matter what color you are. And we have to learn to live together and be able to help each other instead of knocking down one and the other. We have to unite as a people, not as human beings. Anyway, I don't want to get into more of that, but I think we have to unite more. And we have to forget that where we all came from, because we all came from the same place. We all have the same substance. We all have blood and bones and skin, and so one came from one part of the country and the other came, but we all came from the same substance. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Right. So let's find those common issues, right? Or those common ideas. That's how we're going to get through a lot of this, I think.
More commonalities than not. Keith has put in the chat, how do you stay motivated when you try to advocate for what's moral, ethical, and put people first when the pushback is tremendous? Examples, your job, housing, safety, etc., is continually threatened.
Yeah, so you know, I encounter that with some of the folks that you know, when we talk about like housing, right? We're at a point where you got to recognize that, like, if you're paying Manhattan prices, you know, to live in your neighborhood, something is wrong, right? And so everybody is impacted by this now. You know, you can make the case when there's prosperity and folks are doing great and everybody has a job and all, but like when people don't, you have to call to question, right? What can we do? And so there are different efforts across the state, you know, and at the legislative level or at the local level to be able to help, you know, eviction defense, that kind of stuff. Like we can't survive another round of putting people into the streets. It just doesn't work that way, right? So like we have to do something about housing. And so it's moments of crisis sometimes where we can come together best. But it's always better to think and have some foresight, right? To be able to implement, you know, the Native American 7 generations idea, where you think about your decisions today impacting the next 7 generations. And so do we have a system that is going to be able to do help when the time comes, right? Do we have an infrastructure to support whatever changes may come? And if the answer is no, then we have to think about that. And that requires, you know, conversations and identifying that common ground, but also finding policy, you know, that can work for people, right? It should be helping people. It should be getting folks out of ruts. It should be, you know, removing obstacles. And that's just being human, right? Caring for one another. There's no political orientation around that. It's just being human and caring for one another, I think, at the end of the day.
Polo, you have a couple of comments in the chat. Karen said, all created equal. Zonia said, excellent information. Denise said, thank you, Mr. Morales, for your time today and all that you do to help others. This is so needed in the world today. And Karen said, it's not until environment acts upon us that it changes, and we have to look at what we can do to create more equitable environments.
That's exactly it.
So I think this was a great conversation. Obviously, you had a lot of people in the chat and questioning. So I think, as I always ask, if we can get a round of virtual or actual applause for Mr. Morales today, we really appreciate your time. Excellent, excellent presentation. Really got us thinking. I'm going to take about 2 more minutes of your time, if I can just share my screen. So we heard from Mr. Polo today. Thank you so much. And I know some of you are going on the group site to interact and to answer questions. I'm going to be posting a question after each module. So I will pose a question after today's. And so if you could just go on there, and if you want to respond or you have something else to say, that's great. We really want this to be interactive for you. So that's something that we really want you to do. Follow us on Linktree. We have our YouTube, we have our Instagram, we have our Facebook. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is brought to you by Children's Bureau, Best Start, Antelope Valley, and AVPH, our contractor partners. And so we'd love to have you follow us. This is a great chance to connect. And next week we have Shenandoah Chefalo. She is going to be doing trauma-informed paradigm shifts in policy and practice. So much like what Polo was talking about today, this is actually taking policy and actually talking about what you can do moving it forward. And so that is going to be September 20th at 9 o'clock. And finally, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. As I mentioned, it's getting cooler out here in the AV. So for my AV peeps, we're getting a bit of a breather. So I hope you have a lovely Tuesday. Take care. See you next week. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Morales. And God be with you. And God bless America.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Thanks, Karen.
Stay cool. It's still warm. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, friend.